Amina felt the air in the hall thick as if it could be cut with a knife. The metallic tang of fear and sweat hung around, mingling with the measured hum of machines outside the walls. The other participants tried not to look at each other. Some whispered prayers, others just stood there, staring into the void, as if they had already resigned themselves to the inevitable. She clenched her fists tighter, trying to keep her composure. But it wasn't easy, especially under his gaze. The black-masked guard was standing a little ways away, but it was impossible not to notice the way he was drilling her with his eyes. It wasn't just interest. It was open hatred, cold and sharp as a blade. Every movement he made seemed strangely deliberate. When he gave out instructions, his voice sounded steady, but each time he approached Amina, it was as if he slowed down on purpose, letting his shadow fall on her longer than on the others. There was something menacing in his silence, as if he were saying, "You are my target." She looked away, trying not to show how much it hurt her. "They want us to be afraid," she thought, "but I won't give them that pleasure." A loud siren cut through the tense silence, causing everyone to shudder. There was a metallic scraping sound, and the huge doors in front of the participants began to open slowly, revealing a dark corridor lit only by sparse red lights. "Let's go," one of the guards commanded. The crowd moved forward hesitantly. Amina walked in the middle, feeling hundreds of stares, and not only from the participants. Behind her there was a quiet chuckle. She turned around and saw the very same guard. His eyes glittered from beneath his mask, and he spoke with just his lips. "You won't last long here." Her heart clenched, but she kept walking, not allowing herself to turn around again. Let him try, she thought. I've seen worse. The corridor led them to a huge hall, the walls of which were covered with bright, multicolored panels. In the center of the hall were strange structures that looked like children's playgrounds, but there was something unnatural, almost eerie about them. "Welcome to your first game," announced a voice from above, cold and mechanical. Amina felt her breathing quicken. She glanced around at the other participants. Some were shaken, others were trying to maintain their masks of bravery. But her gaze stopped again on the guard. He stood against the wall, but his eyes were fixed on her like a predator preparing to leap. He said nothing, but his silence spoke more than any words. He didn't just want her dead, he wanted her to suffer, to have her will broken. Or maybe that's what he's trying to accomplish, Amina thought. She took a deep breath. Her face remained impassive, but a fire raged inside. If he wants the game, he'll get it. The game started with a simple task. The participants had to walk on platforms suspended above the abyss. Each of them could support the weight of a person, but not all of them were stable. They had to choose their way carefully, relying on intuition or luck. Amina stood in the middle of the line, watching as the contestants in front nervously stepped from one platform to another. Some of them had already gone down, their screams echoing through the hall. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she remained outwardly calm. "Hey, you!" A rough shout cut through the tense silence. It was the guard. His voice was louder than necessary, drawing everyone's attention. "Why are you slowing down? Or are you scared already?" Amina turned her head, meeting his gaze. He stood at the edge of the hall, arms crossed over his chest. You couldn't see his expression beneath the mask, but his mocking tone spoke for itself. "I'm waiting my turn," she replied calmly. "I'm sure it won't help you," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People like you always lose." Some of the participants furtively glanced at each other, but no one intervened. Everyone was thinking only of their own survival. One woman lowered her eyes as if her conscience was troubled, but she said nothing. Amina didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing his reaction. She stepped forward when it was her turn, focusing on the task at hand. She knew her every move was being closely watched. When she successfully crossed to the second platform, the guard shouted out again, "Aren't you going to fall? Surprise! You usually fail unless it's a matter of running or dancing." This time, his words elicited a quiet laugh from one of the participants. It was a young guy with a nervous look who was clearly trying to defuse the situation, but instead made it even more unpleasant. Amina felt the heat flood her face, but she didn't stop. When she reached the end, the guard was already waiting for her. He stood blocking the passage and didn't move. "And now what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm. He silently took a step to the side, but his look of contempt spoke more than words. After the game, the participants were taken to the common room where they were offered some food, a bowl of rice and water. Amina kept to herself, but the guard couldn't seem to leave her alone. When she went to get her portion, he stood in front of her and threw the spoon on the floor. "Oh, accidentally," he said with a sneer. "Pick it up if you want to eat." Some of the participants froze, watching what was happening. One of the men standing nearby wanted to say something, but when he met the guard's gaze, he quickly turned away. Amina slowly bent down and picked up the spoon. Her fingers trembled, but she kept her face impassive. "Thank you," she said calmly, looking him straight in the eye. "You're welcome," he replied, smirking. As she sat down at the table, her table-mate muttered quietly, "You're brave. I couldn't do that." Amina looked at her. The girl looked scared, but sincere. "It's not courage," Amina replied, barely containing her anger. "It's just a necessity." In the evening, when the participants returned to their rooms, the guard once again made it clear that he would not stop. He deliberately delayed Amina at the entrance, searching her longer than the others, and roughly threw her things on the floor. "You think you're smarter than everyone else?" he whispered, leaning closer so only she could hear. "You're nothing. You're just a number here." Amina looked up at him, her eyes flashing. "We're all just numbers, and so are you," she said before walking past him. The words hurt him. She saw his shoulders tense and knew he wouldn't forget this moment. But she was ready. Let's pause for a moment. Tell us in the comments where you're hearing our stories from, and if there have been times in your life when you have faced injustice or prejudice. We care to know your thoughts and hear your stories. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now we continue. The next task promised to be simple. The participants had to collect the keys hidden in the maze and use them to open the doors leading to the safe zone. Time was limited, and there were fewer keys than participants. Anyone who failed to do so would inevitably be trapped in the maze, and his or her fate was sealed. The guard, standing at the entrance to the labyrinth, dispensed instructions at a leisurely pace, his voice steady but his eyes searching for a single target. When it was Amina's turn, he moved closer than necessary, almost touching her shoulder. "Let's see how you do," he said, holding out a map of the maze. Her map was oddly curved, with dark spots, as if something had been erased or added. She noticed it quickly, but didn't let it show. "He's obviously up to something," her mind flashed. As soon as the signal sounded, Amina rushed into the maze. She studied the map carefully, but the deeper she went, the more she realized that the routes didn't match. Instead of leading her to the keys, the map led her to dead ends. Footsteps were heard behind her. When she looked back, she saw the guard following her, though no one else was in the way. "Lost?" he asked mockingly, taking off his mask for a moment to wipe his forehead. His face was as cold as his voice. "You don't have much time. I hope you make it." "Would you show me the right way?" she replied, trying to sound calm. He snorted. "People like you don't deserve a clue." Her fingers clenched into a fist, but she only looked at him coldly. Amina kept moving. After walking down a few corridors, she noticed a strange door that wasn't on the map. It looked like an emergency exit, but a muffled noise could be heard behind it. As she got closer, she realized it was a trap. As soon as she pushed the door open, the floor began to settle. She would have fallen into a pit with sharp metal spikes at the bottom. She jumped back, her heart pounding frantically. Turning around, she noticed the guard watching from the shadows. His face lit up with a smirk when he saw her proximity to the hole. "You were close," he said, moving closer, "but apparently not as smart as you seemed." "Or smarter than you bargained for," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. She quickly noticed that the floor beneath the guard was beginning to settle as well. It was a trap for everyone in the area. Amina took a step to the side, finding herself on a safe platform. The guard, realizing that the situation was out of his control, tried to move back, but it was too late. The floor cracked beneath him and he hung on the edge, grasping the ledge. "Help me," he wheezed, fear appearing in his voice for the first time. Amina paused for a second. Her mind struggled with her emotions. She could leave him there, but that would mean she would liken herself to him. She held out her hand, but not to help. Instead, she pointed him in the direction of the only safe way out. "Find it yourself," she said. "People like you don't deserve tips." She turned and walked away, leaving him to fight for his life. Amina reached the safe zone a few seconds before time ran out. She sank to the floor tiredly, feeling the weight of the whole experience. When she looked back, she saw the guard emerge from the maze, dirty and with torn clothes. His gaze had been full of hatred, but now there was something else in it, a hint that he had underestimated her. She endured his gaze without averting her eyes, and for the first time she noticed that the other participants began to look at her with respect. "He tried to break me, but I'm still here," she thought as she prepared for the next challenge. The dim light of the lamp in the common room cast long shadows on the walls, but Amina, sitting on her bed, did not notice it. Her eyes were staring into the void, but her thoughts carried her far beyond this room. The past, like a ghost, reminded her again, bringing with it the pain and strength that had shaped her. She remembered her first day of school in a foreign neighborhood. Amina was the only black girl among the white faces. Her mother, holding her hand, tried to smile, but her eyes were filled with the same worry that Amina herself felt. "You have to be strong," Mother said. "You are so much more than they can understand." But that day was the first time Amina experienced what it meant to be different. The other kids avoided her as if she were contagious. At recess, a boy she didn't even know came up to her and threw her, "Your skin is dirty. Why can't you wash it off?" She didn't answer, but tears came to her eyes. When she got home, Amina tried to wipe the dirt off her face until her skin was bloody. Her mother found her in the bathroom and, instead of comforting her, made her look at her reflection. "You're beautiful, just the way you are. Don't ever let them think otherwise." Those words stuck in her mind like an anchor, holding her through her most difficult moments. Amina was already a teenager when one day her best friend, Jamal, became the victim of an unfair accusation. He was arrested at a shopping center for a theft he didn't commit. The security guard immediately pointed him out, not bothering to check the cameras. "Guys like him are always stealing something," the guard threw in. Amina, despite her fear, stepped forward. She loudly demanded to see the evidence, drawing a crowd around her. The cameras, as it turned out, proved Jamal's innocence. When the guard silently let him go, Amina looked him in the eye and said, "People like you think they can do whatever they want. But we will not be silent." This incident taught her that sometimes fighting for justice requires not only strength but also a voice. Later, working in a well-known company, Amina again faced barriers. Her colleagues ignored her suggestions, and her boss openly said that she should be grateful for the work instead of demanding more. "Do you think you deserve a promotion?" he once asked with a sneer. "Maybe you could start by just keeping up with the others." But she still fought on, studying nightly, improving her skills, and when she was offered a position in a competing company, she accepted it without even leaving a farewell letter. Amina blinked, returning from her memories to the cold reality of the game. She realized that it was those moments, full of pain and humiliation, that had made her who she was now. Her gaze fell on the guard who stood nearby, watching everyone. He was just another face in a long line of those who were trying to break her, but she knew she wouldn't give him that chance. "I've walked too far to stop here," she thought, clenching her fists. The shadows of the past were no longer a burden to her. They became her weapons. The participants gathered in the central hall where they were announced the next challenge. The walls were decorated with intimidating symbols, and tension was in the air. Everyone stood in silent anticipation as the guard, the one who had disliked Amina, stepped forward. "Today, we're going to add a little variety," he said, looking around at the group. His voice sounded cold, but there was mockery in it. He stopped in front of Amina, and his gaze was full of hidden gloating. "You," he said, pointing a finger at her, "will be our special participant." There was a pause in the hall, and all eyes turned to Amina. She felt her heart beating faster, but she remained calm. "What does that mean?" she asked in an even voice. The guard smirked. "This means that you will now be a target. Participants can exchange their points for your punishment, like depriving you of food or sleep, anything to make your life more interesting." He took a step closer, leaning in so that only she could hear his words. "You're used to being the victim, right? So let's make sure that's true." The guard started with small provocations. When Amina went to get her portion of food, he stopped her. "I'm sorry, but your scores are frozen tonight. Someone decided you didn't deserve dinner." The other participants looked at each other, but no one dared to interfere. Some even smirked, as if enjoying the spectacle. Amina stepped back silently, holding back hunger and humiliation. Later that day, a security guard approached a group of participants and spoke to them quietly but deliberately, loud enough for Amina to hear. "Did you see how she failed the last test? People like her always cling to pity. You want her to win?" A few people, not wanting to draw attention to themselves, nodded or muttered something back. "Exactly. She's weak. They don't deserve to stay." By late afternoon, the guard had gone even further, openly provoking other participants. If someone wants to earn extra points, just keeping her awake is enough. You know what to do. One of the participants, a nervous young woman with dark circles under her eyes, tried to object. "This is wrong. She's a human being, too." But the guard interrupted her. "Do you want to be the next target?" The woman fell silent. That night, several participants were banging on the walls near where Amina was sleeping. Others talked loudly, laughed, and deliberately created noise. Amina lay in the dark with her eyes closed but could not sleep. The next morning, the guard decided to deliver the final blow. He took Amina to the center of the hall and addressed the other participants. "Look at her. She's not even trying to fight. All her efforts are a pathetic show. Maybe it's time to get rid of her." A few participants laughed. Some were silent, but no one backed her up. "Maybe you'll say something?" he continued, turning to Amina. She raised her head, her eyes flashing with fury, but her voice remained calm. "You want me to break? Is that the best you can do?" His smirk faded slightly, but he took a step closer. "We'll see how long you last." Amina withdrew silently, returning to her seat. She felt isolated, but it didn't break her. She knew the guard was doing everything he could to make her lose her composure, but she also knew his self-confidence was his weakness. Her silence was not a sign of weakness, but a strategy. She was preparing for an answer that would make everyone reconsider their opinion of her. "You think you've won," she thought, watching him, "but you have no idea how wrong you are." No one was smiling this time. The participants stood in tense silence as the announcer announced the rules of the new game. The words "survival game" lit up on the screen in front of them. "This trial will test which of you are ready to go all the way." The host's voice was as cold as ice. "Each of you has 3 lives. Losing all your lives means immediate expulsion. The winner will be the one who keeps at least 1. The task was simple only at first glance. The participants were divided into teams, each of which had to defend its territory while capturing enemy resources. But there was one "but" in this game. Each team had a leader who was chosen by the guard. "The leader of the C team will be Amina," the guard said with a smirk. His choice was not random. He knew that the C team consisted of the weakest participants, those who had barely passed the previous tests. Amina was at a decided disadvantage. The game started at the siren. The teams scattered, taking up positions. Amina tried to organize her men, but encountered resistance. "We won't listen to her," shouted one of her teammates, a tall man with a tattoo on his neck. "She's going to ruin us all." "If you act alone, we will lose," Amina said firmly. "We have a chance if we work together." But her words were drowned in the chaos. Many of her team scattered, leaving her virtually alone. From the observer's side, the guard looked on, barely holding back a smile. "Watch her sink," he whispered to his co-worker. The first attack came unexpectedly. The A-team, the most organized and strongest, stormed into Amina's territory. The few who stayed with her were confused. "They're too strong," shouted one of the participants, running backwards. Amina, on the other hand, didn't budge. She quickly assessed the situation and noticed that the enemy team was using the same strategy, attacking head-on. "Retreat to the narrow passage," she shouted. "They can't all go through together." Several men followed her instructions, and when the opponents tried to enter, they were trapped. The narrow passage deprived them of their numerical advantage. Amina and her team were able to repel the attack, but victory came at a high price. 2 of her participants lost their lives, 3 others refused to continue the game. Now, Amina was left with only a couple of people willing to go all the way. She looked around at them tiredly. "We need to be more cunning," she said. "We can't win by force, but we can exploit their weaknesses." She quickly came up with a plan. Instead of defending their territory, they launched surprise attacks on other people's resources, forcing their opponents to waste time and energy on defense. Amina's team used cunning and agility, avoiding direct confrontations. The guard, watching this, began to lose his smirk. "Is she winning?" he muttered unhappily. By the final trial, only 3 teams remained. Amina and her men found themselves in the center of the field, surrounded by opponents. "They want to finish us off," said one of her remaining members. "Then let's make them make a mistake," Amina replied. She set up an ambush using the rubble of old structures in the field. When the enemy began to advance, she coordinated her actions to surround them. It was a risky move, but it worked. Amina lost another life, but her team was able to hold on until the end. When the siren announced the end of the game, Amina, exhausted but standing upright, looked at the guard. His eyes read fury mixed with a touch of surprise. She'd endured, despite everything. And now she knew his plan to break her had failed. "You wanted to see me fall," she said quietly as she approached him to take the token for passing the stage. "But I'm still standing." Her words were quiet, but there was more power in them than in any victory speech. The guard turned away, but she knew this wasn't over. Let's pause for one more brief moment. Write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Has there been anything in your life similar to what Amina is experiencing? Share your thoughts. If you like what you're reading, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss new chapters. We continue. Amina stood at the window, looking at the darkening sky. A sense of victory burned inside her, but it was deceptive. Even though she had won an important victory, her heart was heavy. She knew the trials had only just begun, and every step could be decisive. The guard, the one behind all her suffering, wasn't going to stop. He was ready to use all his means to break her, and Amina could feel her strength beginning to drain. But in this world where trust had become a luxury, she couldn't afford to be lonely. A few days passed, and 3 men appeared in the lounge where the participants were trying to find some solace. They approached Amina as she sat in the corner, as if avoiding attention. Their faces were tense, but determination burned in their eyes. "You're not alone in this game," Jason, a tall man with a beard, began. "We know you survived because of your intelligence, and we want to help." Amina looked at them carefully. This was unexpected. She didn't trust anyone, but there was a sincerity in their voices that made her wonder. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, not hiding her doubts. "Why should I believe you?" A man with short hair, named Tony, answered first. "We're all in the same boat. If you lose, so are we. The guards aren't just playing with you, they're playing with us. We can't let them use us as pawns." Her gaze stopped on the woman who stood silently beside her. It was Lisa, a participant who had been through a brutal ordeal herself. "We can't win alone," she added. "But if we work together, we have a chance." Amina felt something stirring in her chest. Maybe this was a chance, the chance she had been looking for so long, and yet the wariness in her eyes was unchanged. "All right, I'll do it," she said, clenching her hands into fists. "But if any of you try to betray me, there will be no mercy." The 3 nodded. At first, things went according to plan. They did help her, sharing information about the other members and their weaknesses. Together, they survived the ordeal by joining forces, and Amina began to think that perhaps this alliance could be her salvation. But soon she noticed that Jason began to avoid her eyes, and Tony became too quiet. Lisa, on the other hand, was increasingly looking for ways to act on her own, and her behavior was becoming more and more erratic. Once, as they were getting ready for their next test, Amina noticed Tony and Jason exchanging a quick glance and talking quietly. She couldn't understand what they were saying, but her intuition told her something was wrong. In the evening, before the start of the important test, Amina approached Lisa, who was sitting alone in a corner with her head down tiredly. "What's going on?" she asked, not hiding her excitement. "You're hiding something." Lisa shook her head, but then seemed to give up. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice shaky. "The guards, they came to me. Damn things. They're threatening my family. If I don't do what they want, they'll kill them." Amina felt a heavy twinge in her chest. She couldn't imagine what Lisa was going through, but she knew she was trapped. "You're not alone," she said quietly, coming closer. "We're with you. We're all going through this together. You don't have to do what they say." Lisa looked at her gratefully, but her eyes were full of fear. "I can't risk it. They said if I don't help them win, they'll kill my mother. I can't let that happen." Amina felt her soul tearing with pain, but she knew that Lisa couldn't have been the only one threatened. The guards had used those who were weak, and now her allies seemed to be starting to give up. The next morning, as Amina was getting ready for a new test, she ran into Jason and Tony. They were standing next to each other and talking quietly about something. When they noticed her, their faces changed, and Amina realized something was wrong. "I can't take it anymore," Tony said, avoiding her gaze. "They're threatening us too. If we don't do what they say, we're gone. Do you understand that?" Jason added, "We can't keep doing this. You are our only chance to survive, but if we don't cooperate with them, death awaits us." Amina felt the ground go from under her feet. This was exactly what she had feared. They had betrayed her. The guards had made them play on her weakness and use her for their own ends. "You betrayed me," she said in a cold voice, holding back her rage. "But you don't realize that you are only weakening yourself. I will not stand by those who violate my principles." Jason and Tony were silent, but there was fear in their eyes. Lisa, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached them. "You can't count on them," she said quietly. "But now you can exploit their weaknesses. You know what to do." Amina didn't waste a moment. She knew that betrayal was not the end, but only the beginning of a new game. "Do you want to be alive?" she asked, turning to her former allies. "Then do whatever I say. If you want to survive, you must work for me, not the guards." They felt they had no choice. And though the betrayal had left a scar, Amina knew how to use it to her advantage. If they thought it could be broken, they were wrong. As time passed, Amina became more and more cautious every day. She knew that her life, as well as the lives of the other participants, hung in the balance. They were all pawns in a game where the rules were written in blood, and each new day could be the last. But today there was something particularly unsettling. Amina felt her footsteps getting closer and closer to the inevitable confrontation, a direct face-to-face with the guard. She knew it would happen sooner or later. The dark hall where they were gathered before the next test was filled with participants, each hiding their thoughts behind a mask of fear or despair. Amina stood in the corner, not taking her eyes off the door that led to the main hall, where, according to her calculations, the trials would take place. Her mind was focused on the moment ahead. She knew the guard would not leave her alone. He had shown his hatred more than once, sometimes even holding back his words so as not to give away his attitude. Today she felt his gaze, cold, the same as his stony words. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was him. Amina knew he was coming. The guard was one of those people who could be called the epitome of terror. His face was hidden by a mask, but his eyes were his weapon. Steely, ruthless. When the door opened and the guard entered the hall, all the participants froze. He did not say a word, but his presence made the air even heavier. He was tall and powerful. His figure seemed unnaturally stern and his movements mechanical. He wasn't just a guard, he was part of a system that decided people's fates, and today he had come for her. Amina met his gaze without averting her eyes. A fire burned in her soul, and despite all her caution, she could not back down. In that moment, she knew that this man could be her destiny. If he broke her, all would be lost. But if she could defeat him, she would send a signal to everyone else. They need not fear. "Do you think you can survive?" said the guard, his voice as sharp as a knife blade. He took a step forward, and all the participants stepped back, creating a space around her. "You are but a pawn, Amina. This place will break you like all the others. You will save no one, and your game will be over as soon as I say so." Amina didn't move. Her breathing remained calm despite the growing tension. She felt her body begin to tense up, as if ready to collide. This moment was critical. She knew the guard would try his best to break her. "You don't understand." Her voice sounded hard, as if she'd become part of the stone. "You can't break me because you don't understand what strength is. You don't understand what it is to stand when everyone around you is falling. You don't understand what it is to be human." The guard stopped. His face remained hidden behind the mask, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't expected such a response from her. He was used to people falling to their knees when faced with his power, begging for mercy. But Amina was not like that. Her words were like a weapon, and they struck him point blank, making him think. It was exactly what he couldn't understand. Something inside her was beyond his control. "You think your words are going to make a difference?" The guard stepped forward, his voice colder. "You're just a part of this machine. You don't go beyond it. Don't kid yourself." But Amina didn't back down. She could feel her blood boiling and her words becoming even more powerful. "You're wrong. You think you control me, but you don't realize that you can't control what you can't see. You don't see the power that burns in people who have lost everything. You don't realize that I can lose everything, but I won't stop fighting. You can't defeat those who are willing to burn their fears away." His gaze became fierce. He stepped closer, and everyone in the room held their breath. He was ready to do anything to break her. But Amina didn't give up. He began, but he couldn't finish. His voice suddenly weakened, as if something inside him had broken. It was the moment he realized he couldn't defeat her so easily. He was ready to crush her by force, but her resilience, her determination, became a barrier to him. He fell silent, and for a second they stood as if time had slowed down. You could see the rage in his eyes, but also the confusion. He was used to ruling this world, to being the one who decided who lived and who died. But Amina became more than just part of the game. She became the catalyst for something bigger. She became the one who reminded him that there was not only power in this world, but a human spirit that could not be broken. The guard took a step back. The silence in the hall was as tense as a tightrope. All the participants watched this moment as if it were the most important part of the game. Everyone realized that this was not just a confrontation between two people. It was a clash of two worlds, a world where rules are written by fear and violence, and a world where a man maintains his honor and dignity no matter what. Everything was on the line. But Amina felt that today she had won, not in the physical sense, but in her soul, and this moment was her victory. "You lost," she said quietly, looking into his eyes. The guard didn't answer. He turned and walked away, leaving her in silence. But Amina knew that this victory was only the beginning. The final game was always what everyone dreaded and what everyone dreamed of. It was the moment when each participant's decision determined their fate. A time when everything that came before lost its importance. Every step, every mistake or victory meant life or death. In this hell, where everyone was equal in their vulnerability, Amina realized she would either survive or lose everything she held dear. She stood on the field, surrounded by the point of weapons, ominous lights, and the darkness that hid the face of the enemy. All who remained were like beasts, ready to rush into battle for their lives. But Amina felt that for her, this game was not about surviving at all costs. Her fight was for something more, for justice, for respect, for not being destroyed by a system that used suffering as a means of control. The guards stood on a high platform, their masks expressing no emotion, but their eyes followed every participant. Amina knew that this time they wouldn't just let her emerge victorious. They wanted to see her broken. They wanted her to drop to her knees like everyone else. The game began, and Amina quickly realized that this was not just a test of endurance or agility. It was a psychological trap in which a choice had to be made between personal values and survival. Strange objects resembling traps were set up on the field for the game, but they all hid something more terrifying. Amina quickly realized that to win, she had to complete several tasks, each of which required a sacrifice. She had to choose between saving her life and losing something important. Every wrong step, every delay would cost her life, and the first sacrifices were hard. When she reached the first obstacle, the screen in front of her read, "To pass, remove your mask." Amina froze. The mask was a symbol of her protection. She had worn it since her first challenge, and it helped her hide from the eyes of those who wanted to see her weakness. It was her last shield, but if she did not remove the mask, she would not be able to pass. Time was running out, and the choice was obvious. Amina didn't hesitate. She took off her mask and immediately felt the cold air burn her face. She didn't want to lose her identity, her personality, but she realized that now was her only chance. She stepped forward. The next task was much more difficult. A screen appeared on the field, showing pictures of her loved ones, people she had once loved. It was incredibly painful. She knew they were safe, as she thought they were. But the screen read, "Only one of these people can be saved. Choose." Amina felt her insides clench with pain. She remembered her mother's face, her smile, her voice when she said Amina was her pride. But Amina knew that choice wasn't real. It was another manipulation. They were trying to make her think that she couldn't be strong, that she couldn't be a person with morals in this place. But she couldn't give in. "I won't do it," she whispered under her breath, seeing her heart beat faster. "I won't let them break me." The pictures disappeared from the screens, and Amina realized that her decision was the right one. She hadn't given up, but now she was ready for something even worse. When she came to the final test, her heart was already wiped out with pain and loss. But she couldn't stop. She knew that now she had to make a choice that could cost her her life. This game had long since ceased to be just a game. It was a test of her spirit, her intentions, her very existence. In front of her was a huge metal screen that read, "To win, make a choice, abandon your honor, or stay alive." The screen showed her actions in the game, every moment when she refused to obey, when she stood against the system. Every step, every thought, every look was part of her struggle. And now she had to choose which was more important, her own life or her honor. Amina knew there was no other way for her. She couldn't give up. She couldn't become part of what was destroying her. She had left her life in this place, but she hadn't lost her soul. "I choose honor," she said without hesitation. At that moment, the screen went blank and the guards appeared in front of her. She knew her choice was the right one, but she also knew that this could be the end of her. However, she couldn't go back. She was ready for the consequences, ready to meet her fate. The guards approached and stopped in front of her. She saw one of them tilt his head slightly, as if recognizing her strength. He said quietly but respectfully, "You won, but you paid the price." She felt her body begin to shake, fatigue engulfing her mind. In that moment, however, she realized she hadn't lost. She had won. She had preserved her humanity, her honor, and her soul. The guards retreated and Amina remained standing, staring into the void. She had survived, but the price had been too high. But she knew one thing. In this game, she had won not by strength, but by spirit. Amina stood in the center of the hall, where everything seemed frozen in time. The guards stood around her, their rigid silhouettes almost blending into the darkness. But now, in this moment, she was ready to act. She had won the game, but not in the way everyone expected. She knew that despite her determination and resilience, her journey was not yet complete. The game was far from over. As the guards stepped aside, she saw the space around her change. In that moment, she realized that something had gone wrong. This was not the moment when all appeals for justice led to victory. This was the moment when she had to reveal the truth, regardless of the consequences. Amina felt her heart clench as the guard who had been her main tormentor from the beginning appeared in her path. He stood before her like a monument, hiding his humanity behind the mask of a soulless guard. But now, despite the mask, she saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't just contempt, it was realization. He knew her spirit wasn't broken, and he was willing to do anything to keep her alive. But Amina knew her moment had come. Everything she had endured, every step, every humiliation, every trial in this game had led her to one decision. She couldn't let him continue to run her life, couldn't let the system behind this nightmare go unpunished. "Did you think you could break me?" she said, her voice firm, but her voice was troubled. "You're as much a part of the game as anyone here, and you let yourself forget that I'm not just a pawn. I'm a human being. You didn't beat me." Her words echoed through the hall, and the guard froze. He hadn't expected such a turn, but Amina knew it was her only chance. She stepped forward, confident that her words, as well as her actions, could change everything. Amina turned to the group of organizers who stood in the shadows and directed her gaze at them with cold determination. "Everything you see here is not a game. It's manipulation, lies, and destruction. This man," she pointed to the guard, "took me out of the game because he was sure he could win. He used racism, humiliation, and violence to break me. But I don't give in." The organizers sat hidden behind screens, but now they couldn't hide from the truth. Amina made sure everyone heard her. A fire flared in her chest and she felt the world around her change. All that she had experienced was now becoming her weapon. She was ready to reveal everything behind this horrible spectacle. "This is not a game of survival. It's a show of cruelty," she continued, her voice growing more and more furious. "You make us fight, not for life, but for your satisfaction, your entertainment. You created this hell, and I will expose you." But at that moment, just when she thought the truth might win out, there was an unexpected turn. The guard took a step forward. He wasn't just a guard. He was part of the system, part of those behind this nightmare. Suddenly, other guards emerged from the darkness. Amina realized that her exposure had led to consequences she could not have predicted. She was surrounded. Her every word had led her to this trap, and now she was a victim of her own determination. One of the guards, the one standing closest, leaned toward her and said quietly, "Did you think you could win? You thought you could change the system? All you did was sign your own judgment." Amina felt her heart clench. She knew that she was close to uncovering the truth, but her fortitude could not save her from a tragic fate. In that moment, she realized that even if she won, even if her exposure led to a great change, she herself would no longer be a part of this world. The guards quickly brought their weapons up, and all she had time to do was take one last look into the eyes of those who were part of this hell. She couldn't say she was defeated because she didn't give in, but she did realize that her journey was over. The guards fired. The second the bullets pierced her body, Amina felt the life drain away. But at the same time, she wasn't afraid. She felt no fear, only relief that her words were finally being spoken. She wasn't just a participant in the game. She had become a symbol that even in hell, it was possible to retain one's humanity. Her fall was silent, and the moment her body touched the cold floor, she knew her sacrifice had not been in vain. Pain boiled in her veins, but there was strength in her eyes. She had broken the chains and shown everyone that even in the most brutal of struggles, it was possible to remain human. When it was over and the organizers rose from their seats, they knew that Amina had won. Not in the game, not in the physical sense, but in the fact that she had left an indelible mark that could not be erased. She found her freedom at the moment of her death, and her story will live on, despite all that she endured. The game is over, but its truth will live on in the hearts of those who were willing to listen. What do you think about this story? What emotions did it evoke in you? Have you had any incidents of racism or injustice in your life that you have had to deal with? We really value your opinion, and every word is important to us. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on new stories. We are very grateful for your support and hope that each of you will find the strength to fight for truth and justice. We wish you a good day.